Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this PowerMate Pulse 1750. This is one of two that my buddy Jason rescued from the trash. I did a video recently on the first one. It was a green PowerMate Pulse, which looked to be in new condition. That said, though, I didn't give it much of a chance because it had no compression and also what sounded like rod knock. And surprisingly, that machine lives again. And to be honest, I was kind of hoping to use it for parts because this machine, it needs parts. We're missing the airbox. A couple of the feet are broken off, and the general condition of this machine is not great. It is dirty. It is scratched up. There is a bit of rust on it. That said, though, I think we do have a better starting point than the last one. This engine turns over and has compression. So assuming we have spark, timing, and fuel, this thing should run. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. All right, first things first, let's check the oil. Make sure we have some. And yeah, we do have oil, but it's pretty low and it's pretty dark. So I don't usually start by changing the oil. But given how low it is, I think it makes sense just to drain out what's in there and probably start with some new. I'm also noticing too, this engine, I just assumed it was a Briggs, but it's not. According to the code here, it is an FA 130D model, which is actually made by Kawasaki. So it's a very good engine, but parts for these are very hard to come by. So hopefully we don't need parts, but I know we already need an airbox. So yeah, that might end up being a challenge. Anyway, I'm going to get this elevated a bit. We're going to pull the drain plug and get some fresh oil in there. Although, to be fair, we are actually missing both the feet on the right side. So this machine is kind of tilted downhill. And although I would say we're still low on oil, it might not be quite as bad as it looks. I'm noticing too, this machine actually has a low oil module. And given how low the oil is and the fact that we're missing 2 feet, I'm willing to bet the machine was shutting down due to low oil. Question is that the only issue with it? Kind of doubt it. That is some thick oil. Anyway, I think you get the idea. It's been 30 minutes and the oil is still draining. So when it's done, I'm just going to put the plug on. I'm not going to fill it up yet. We'll get the new feed on it, get it nice and level, and then put some fresh oil in. So I've got the machine tipped up on its side. I'm going to get, of course, the broken ones removed, but I'm going to remove all of them because the replacements I have, they're not exactly the same size. So I want to have a matched set of feet. And it looks like this is bent out just a bit. So we'll try to straighten that. All right, that was more work than I anticipated. So it's been well over an hour, between waiting for that oil to come out and getting the feet swapped out. So yeah, a bit of time invested in this, and we haven't even heard the engine run or know if it makes power. So let's get the carb off, we'll get it cleaned up, and then we will try to start it. So the carb, I would say, has not been cleaned, just judging by some of the evidence here. And now that I'm looking at it closer too, this carb is going to be very hard to get off. There are nuts holding it on, and you cannot get a straight shot. The only way to get these off is from the side. So to gain access, I think we do need to pull this cover right here. We need to pull the heat shield, likely the exhaust as well. And once all that's out of the way, we can get a wrench in from the side to get the carburetor off. And we are missing hardware. And that was loose. So someone else, I would say, had the same idea about how to get the carb off. And like the other pulse we just worked on, the bottom two bolts, they are actually the stator bolts. So there is a nut on the far side we have to hold still, and then these should come out. Yeah, I think we might get away with leaving the exhaust on, but we do need to get the top plate off. So to do that, we have to remove this side right here. So that means removing the last two stator bolts. We have a few more bolts right here. Disconnect all the wiring for the capacitor and the bridge rectifier, and then this side should lift away. That will allow the tank to come off, and then we'll have access to the bolts finally to get this plate off. Oh, I forgot one right there, the ground wire. And the stator's actually loose on there now. So I'm going to add a bolt or two back just to keep this stable. So I need to use a bit of caution here. The last carb I took off a Kawasaki, the inlet pipe actually pulled right out of the carb. And these are not available. You cannot buy these carbs used. So I'm just going to cut this line. You know, it's not petrified, but actually I do see a bit of movement. Let's try it. Okay. And then we just have the two nuts, and this should come right off. All right, let's see if there's any fuel in the bowl. The drain turns easy, so that is a good sign. Really hoping this carb can be saved. That actually looks pretty good. Not too bad. Actually, it's very clean in here. So I was really concerned because parts for this do not exist. So the pin is stuck. Let's try an automatic center punch. That might get that free. Didn't even need the punch. Needle looks good. See if the main jet comes out. Yep. And we also have the emulsion tube down the center. There we go. And last but not least, actually we have an adjustable needle right here and the pilot jet right there. So let's see where this is set to currently. Is 1, maybe 1 1/8. Okay, this carb was not in bad shape. It probably would have run the engine. But since we have it apart, let's just clean it up real good. We'll throw it back on the machine. And I think we'll be ready to give this thing a try. Carb cleaned up really well. Not that it was too bad to begin with. This should have run the engine, so it makes me wonder, why did someone throw this away? You know, spark could be an issue, although I doubt it. Compression feels fine. Really, the only issue so far has been the low oil. So we'll get this back together, get it bolted on, and I think it's time we get this engine started and see if this generator makes power. Okay, that should do it. Let's get it back on the machine. And before we can try this out, we do need to get stuff back together. Right now the stator's unsupported and the control panel is disconnected. But I'm thinking before I do that, this plug looks to be an original NGK plug. A lot of rust down by the base, so I'm going to replace that with a new Champion RJ17 LM. So this control panel, it also doubles as the end housing for the generator. And there is a needle bearing in here. So we'll get a little bit of grease on that, as well as the rotor shaft. And then we can put it back together. Let's check this capacitor real quick. It's rated at 7.5 microfarad, plus or minus 5%. And we're at 7.53, so the capacitor, it's still good. See if we can get this sediment bowl off. I want to run this off the tank. The tank, thankfully, is clean and empty, but this, it's not letting go. There we go. Just a bit of old fuel. And just a tiny bit on the line. So I'm going to get this back together. We'll get some fuel in the tank. I think we'll be ready to give this thing a try. All right, let's give this a try. The fuel's on, choke's on, ignition's on. I've also got a light plugged in and turned on. Oop. Almost. Very nice. Started right up, engine sounds good, and we're making power. Now, the voltage, it was a little bit low at 110 volts. You know, this does not have an AVR without a load. I would expect closer to 130 volts. But the engine speed was also slow. That should have been at around 61.5, and instead we were at 58.5. So I do need to increase the spring tension, which I tried to do, but the screwdriver was just a little bit too short. So I'm going to scrounge up a longer one. We'll get it started again and make that speed adjustment. Yeah, I adjusted the engine speed. We're now closer to 62 hertz. And after that adjustment, the voltage came up as well. We're now at 125 volts. So that is quite a bit better. And I think we're at the point where everything critical is working and within spec. Really, the biggest outstanding item here is what to do about the airbox. You know, I have looked online, cannot come up with anything new or used for a Kawasaki FA130. So you know, I might need to come up with something else. You know, I do have extra airboxes. Of course, none of them fit this machine, but potentially I could retrofit one to fit on here. So let me dig out some of the ones I have and see if we can figure anything out. So I dug through my bins. I pulled out a few airboxes that might work. And this one, when I held it up, initially I thought it was going to be a slam dunk. You know, the size of the opening is almost perfect. The bolt holes almost align. So with very little effort, I could get this to bolt on. The problem is I can't operate the choke. And to make matters worse, we also have a heat shield to contend with. And when you add that into the mix, it takes away a lot of space here on the left side of the carb. So now this plate won't go on at all. So unfortunately, that one is out. I also pulled out this one, which is for a Honda clone, and it suffers from a similar issue, except the holes do not align, and, well, we have the same problems with the choke and the heat shield. So unfortunately, that one is out as well. We also have this from a 10-horse Briggs, and initially, you know, I thought it potentially could be made to fit, but the choke and the heat shield, same issues, and the bolt holes, they don't align with anything. So, you know, I'm not saying we couldn't make these work, but it's going to take a lot of work to get any of that to fit into here. So that just kind of leaves us with the original airbox, which of course we're missing all the pieces for. That said, though, I did go back on eBay and I found an intake manifold pipe that I think will fit this carburetor. You know, if it does, that would allow us to put a pod filter on, which admittedly is not ideal, but it would effectively solve the problem. So I've got that ordered up. It'll be here in a few days. when it arrives, we will try it out. And I guess while we wait, let's see if we can do something about some of these marks. I find Goof Off works really well along with a magic eraser. Well, it's actually been about a month since that last video clip. I received the part I ordered from eBay. This manifold was advertised as working with this engine. And when I held it up to the carb, it seemed like it was going to work. But when I actually tried to bolt it on, I couldn't do it because the spacing was actually too tight on this manifold by 2 millimeters. So I ended up sending this to a friend who end milled it, basically elongating the holes, and now it will bolt on to this carburetor. So he actually made a video on that, so I will link to that up above and down in the description. So we are pretty much ready to finish this up. I think we have just about everything we need. We have the pod filter, obviously the manifold that fits, and the last thing we need is a gasket. So let's make one of those up real quick, and then we'll finish this up. So there's a couple different ways to go about making a gasket for this. Probably the easiest is to just hold a piece of gasket material in place and use a ball peen hammer to kind of cut it out into the right shape, which that definitely works, but I find what makes a better, cleaner gasket is to actually make a template first using a piece of paper and a crayon. And just by doing this, you will get an exact image of what you're trying to make with the gasket paper. So once the image is transferred, we will cut this out and use this to draw basically the same shape on the gasket material, and then we'll cut the gasket out. I think that'll do. So I'm going to use this round punch to form the center hole. The bottom part is flat, but it doesn't have to be flat. At least the gasket doesn't have to be. So this here is the 1-inch, which looks to be a pretty good fit. It might be a tad big. Let's try the 7/8. And actually, no, 7/8 is too small. So we're going to go with 1 inch. We'll punch that out, and then we'll punch the 2 holes for the screws. Now, those are the only critical things, are these 3 circles. The outside, we can pretty much cut it any shape we want. We don't have to make it super tight. So, yeah, let's make these holes. Then we'll cut out the rest, and then we'll do it for real on the gasket paper. Okay, well, let's transfer that over to the gasket material and make the final cuts. And that center line, it's just to help put everything on the same plane as far as the holes go. There is a centering pin here, so if I can get the pin on there, on each of these, it should ensure a good fit. Yeah, seems to be a pretty good fit. And the choke opens without issue. So let's get this mounted up, throw the filter on, and we'll be good to go. So this filter, it is just a foam filter. There is no paper element to it. And the manufacturer makes it very clear. You need to oil it properly or you're going to cause engine damage, because without the oil, the fine particles of dust will get through. And on something like a dirt bike, I'd say that is more important. On a generator, likely it's running in a much cleaner environment. That said, though, I am still going to get some oil on there, and then we'll get this installed. All right, let's give this thing a try. Now, despite the name, PowerMate Pulse 1750, this machine's actually only rated at 1400 watts. And I've got 1500 watts of load on standby. So technically, that would be an overload, but I think it can handle it. So the plan is, let's just get the engine started. While it's warming up, we'll double check the outputs. And then we'll put on a half load of 750 watts. If it handles that well, then we'll double it to 1500. All right, so no issues at all getting the machine started without a load. THD is pretty high and fluctuating quite a bit, but it looks like about 26%, and the sine wave definitely looks like a train wreck, but that should clean up a little bit under load. So let's put on a 750 watt load, and no issues handling that. The THD actually stabilized quite a bit at about 25%, just a touch under, and the sine wave also cleaned up. Now, I still wouldn't say it looks great, but it's definitely a lot better than when we started. So let's give this a couple of minutes. Assuming no surprises, we'll try to double the load to 1500 watts. Well, so far so good. No issues at all with 750 watts. So let's see if it can handle an overload of 1500 watts. And it's doing it. THD jumped a little bit to 27%, and the sine wave looks about the same. So yeah, not too bad. So we'll give it a few minutes, but I think it's going to do just fine. No issues at all handling an overload at 1500 watts. So let's take the load off and we'll let the engine cool down, and then we'll shut it down. Well, guys, that's pretty much it. You know, this machine, for being thrown away in the trash, wasn't really in bad shape. You know, the biggest issue was the missing airbox, and likely that wasn't missing until this got tossed in the trash. You know, what I think happened here was that the engine was low on oil, the low oil system was kicking in, and likely the prior owner misinterpreted that as a carb issue. And he was trying to gain access to it, and once he realized the complexity of getting that carb out, you know, that was that. Anyway, at the end of the day, this machine is back up and running again and doing exactly what it should. So, I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.